I don't know about you, but if I were asked if I like mech games, I would say yes, intuitively. And I've played a lot of them, and there's a few I like, but actually not that many. But most importantly, there's one mech game that will always stand out to me as my clear favorite. It's got its flaws, but it's just really, really special. And I'm pretty sure most people out there will have never heard of it. There's some good reasons for that, and some maybe not so good reasons. And no, of course, I'm not talking about Armored Core. I'm not talking about Steel Battalion. Not talking about Chrome Hounds. Not talking about Girly Block. That's a good one. Not really, actually. Also, shoutouts to my College Hard fans out there, or to people that played the PS2 Votoms game. But yeah, none of these is it. Now, there's one very noticeable absence to some people. No, not Heavy Gear. That's a good one too, actually. And that'd be Gungriffon. Bad news, it ain't Gungriffon either. Good news, it's basically Gungriffon, except free. So, in case you don't notice, Mech Simulator is basically Gungriffon, except turning up the milsim elements and vibes in particular up to 11. If you don't know what Gungriffon is, well, just go play that. But fundamentally, Gungriffon is the kind of mech game that is much more focused on the idea of being a game about war that happens to have mechs in it, rather than, oh, giant robots, how cool. The robots in Mech Simulator aren't actually that giant. You're not gonna get Gundam-like huge things here, and there's no melee or anything like that. These things act a little more realistically, and that is one of the things I really like about it. But there's still a lot of other things around the robots in this game that is really cool and relatively grounded. One of the biggest elements is the combined arms aspect of it. As you might have noticed in the clips, there's a lot going on in addition to there being mechs. Not just that, the game tries to represent actual battles with actual objectives, and a lot of forces acting in concert to achieve that objective. The missions in this game are relatively complex. They can also be pretty hard, and if you don't actually figure out the real objective of the mission, you're not gonna be able to do it. There's an actual mission plan to follow with waypoints and everything. There's constant radio chatter going on. There's a supply helicopter that comes in at certain points. There's even the ability to command friendly units around. Now, one thing you might have noticed is that the game is primarily in Japanese, which is true, and it's a little bit of a shame if you don't speak Japanese, but at the same time, I don't speak Japanese, and I'm having a blast with it, and I managed to complete it, even though Mission 10 was a real tough nut. So, the biggest challenge in this game actually comes less from things like reflexes and more from tactics. Understanding how a battle works which units will appear where and where to concentrate your efforts at any given time to make your forces win or achieve the objective is the key to success in this game. I should also mention another key aspect of a lot of other mech games is customization. There's actually none of that in this game. You have your Type 12. It has a cannon, a machine gun, rocket pods, and infrared missiles, and also a radar. We'll get back to that later. And that's it. So if you're the type who loves the mech games for the kind of optimization and customization, this game will not be for you. Instead, what this game is what I'd like to call a battle game. There's not too many of these out there. I think Battle Engine Aquila, probably one of my favorites. But basically it's a game that is all about trying to win a battle. Combined arms, lots of friendly units, objectives, etc. around it, and the main thing you'll be doing is evaluating the actual situation in the battlefield right now and figuring out where you need to be in order to support your forces to achieve the objective. If that sounds up your alley, well, this game is probably one of the best ones like it out there. In fact, the game goes as far as letting you play as additional vehicles once you've finished all the 11 missions. One of them is another mech, one of them is an Apache, and the final one is actually the command vehicle that you see in most missions, where you get to command your forces, call in airstrikes and things like that. It is pretty astounding to me that there isn't really anything like this. The fact that it's a mech game is almost coincidental, and I love it. Despite what you might think looking at the game, this game actually came out in 2013. I know, it looks like it might be from the 90s. Pretty sure the aesthetic choices of this game are done in part as an homage to the original Gungriffon and other milsims of the era, and in part maybe just because it was easier for the devs to make this kind of thing. And one very particular choice you'll note is that there's a relatively low draw distance for units. And it's easy to say that this would just be due to technical limitations of the engine or whatever, but I don't know if it was actually a deliberate choice from the get-go, but the game certainly was designed around this, in a way that really makes me appreciate it, and if I were to make a game like this, I think I would actually do a similar thing. There's a certain conundrum that you normally face when trying to make a game that is about large-scale battles, and is trying to be at least vaguely realistic. And that's the problem of distances. A lot of sims out there, especially on the more hardcore end of the spectrum, suffer a lot from having a whole lot of downtime while you go from one place to another. Now, this isn't actually inherently a bad thing. It's a certain style of pacing. You can enjoy that or hate it. You can also enjoy both this and more faster-paced things. But what if you want to have something that both lets you shoot over what is perceived to be relatively long distances, has something that I guess you might even consider BVR combat, but also doesn't have extremely slow pacing? In particular, when you want the player to be able to react fast to things that happen on one side of the battlefield, when he's on the complete opposite end. Being able to let the player quickly decide where to be and utilize the entire play space is a good thing. Or at least it can be a good thing if you design your game around it, and this game certainly is. The solution in Mech Simulator is the, I would call it, abstracted sight system. As in, you literally cannot see enemy units physically when they're more than about 400 meters away from you. Instead, you have to use your sensors, and you'll notice that a lot of the time in this game I'm shooting at units that I cannot physically see, but they're within sensor range. Every unit in the game has a sensor range, and using allied units, for example, to scout out is actually an important feature in this game. You also have your radar, which allows you to scan ahead much further than any of the other weapons. However, you can't actually shoot with it, right? So you can determine where enemies are, you can determine what kind of enemies there are, but then if you want to move in to actually attack them, you still have to come close. Though, of course, you can use the radar to target the guided missiles that you can call in with your command vehicle, which is a really neat feature as well. But this act of basically abstracting the vision down to a relatively short range and having to rely on sensors across everything else, while it is sort of unrealistic, it does manage to, in essence, compress the play space that is meaningfully utilized by the player very nicely. So you don't have a lot of downtime, but you still require a lot of movement. Both of these are absolutely essential to the way that this game flows, and a lot of its missions wouldn't really work right without it. I mean, this mission right here takes place on a perfectly flat airfield, yet without the radar installations that cover most of the map, I wouldn't be able to tell what is going on in the southeastern corner of it. And of course, in the course of the mission, these radar installations will probably get destroyed, meaning that I will lose my ability to tell what's going on there. Which both adds incentive to try and defend the radar installations, and once they're destroyed, to send out allied units to still try and keep some kind of awareness of what's going on over there. So while it might look goofy at first, it's actually a really integral part of the game design, and leads to some pretty interesting kind of pacing. Most of the missions in this game don't go more than about 10 minutes, and that's on the longer end of the spectrum, so you get a lot of high-intensity tactical decision-making, and it is not like you feel like the missions are small. There's still a lot going on in them. And even just the fact that you cannot physically see things makes things feel further away than it actually is. Again, it might look weird, but it's actually pretty genius. Now, there are some other ways you could try to abstract this. For example, you could physically render units only as long as they're in sensor range, no matter how far away they are. But then you could get weird situations where units that are further away are actually visible when units that are closer to you aren't, because the closer ones aren't covered by a sensor. You would have units popping in and out of existence at all kinds of ranges at all times. I mean, it would also achieve a similar thing, but I feel this implementation of a rather consistent, roughly 400 meters of visual range and everything beyond it is sensor range, achieves great results. Now, one place where I kinda wish you could disable it are the replays. Because it looks kinda weird when you look at these battles. They're actually kinda large, but you can only see about 5 tanks at a time. It's a little bit of a shame. Also, while I'm talking about the replays, this game doesn't have an in-mission save system, and, you know, since the missions are about 10 minutes long at most, it might not seem very necessary. But what you can actually do is, during a replay, you can literally jump in your mech at any point. And there is a fast forward button, so as long as you save the replay of the mission, you can just jump in the replay, fast forward to the point where you screwed up, and jump back in. This is incredibly neat. So, Mech Simulator is a pretty neat game. I can understand why, if you are asking for a good mech game, you might not necessarily like this game so much, because it doesn't actually do a lot of the things that a lot of other mech games do, at least the games that most people think about when they think of mech games. And the fact that there's mechs in this game is almost just a side note. I mean, you play as one, sure, and it's good that you play as one because it enables the player to have the kind of capabilities that set him apart from the rest of the units and take a more central role in influencing the way that the battle is going. But still, this is a combined arms game, and you're just one part in the machine. And boy, is it a beautiful machine. There's so many little things about this game that I love. How active all the units are, especially visually. I mean, look at them like popping smoke and flares, and those actually work in-game. I just really love this game. I love the vibes of this game. I wish there was more mech games like this out there. In particular, ones that stride this nice balance between sort of being a sim in, well, more superficial ways, but actually being much more fast-paced and abstractly designed around being fun games. But this game just does so many of the things that I like out of a lot of video games in general, and just combines them all into one. And yeah, I wish I could understand a lot of the radio calls that are going on. I mean, I can sort of get the bra calls. Well, actually, they're not bra calls, they're burr calls, I guess, bearing in range. But other than that, I have no clue what's going on, and I wish I did. That said, it's free. It runs mostly without issues on Windows 10, so just go give it a spin. And I really wish we would get some more stuff like this in the future.